In this video, I want to quickly talk about how we can improve the way that an image maps onto a surface. So here's an example where the surface, so in this case, this is a surface that has been revolved. So the UV of this surface give us a result which is, it's not really the result we're looking for. So let's talk about how we can control the way that an image is mapped onto a surface. So there's a few ways you can do this, but typically you're going to be using a material and you want to make sure that the map within the material is set up properly. And we do this using UV. So we use UV mapping to have the image project onto the surface the way that we want it to. And there's a bunch of ways that you can constrain the image or customize the way that the image is mapped onto the surface. So by default, you should have this toolbar here the way I have it. Now, typically what I do is actually add a toolbar here on the left. So let me show you how you would do that. So typically I go under the rendering toolbar, which is up here, render tools. And under render tools, you'll see there's this box here, and you have a small triangle at the bottom right. Now, if you click that, you'll see all of these tools. So all of these are texture mapping buttons. So they are shortcuts for different different commands that allow you to map an image in a different property, I guess, different setting. So one of them would be a box. So if you have a box, you can map it so that the top is the same map, the side is the same map, and yeah, and so that's one way that you could set up the UV for your surface. So in this case, because it is a revolved surface, you will see that the result is something that wraps around the revolution, right? So you have a curve, it is revolved 360 degrees, and so the mapping has a very similar effect where it just goes around. Now, that's not what we want for this specific image, so how would we have a flat image project in a way that is flat to this surface? We can use planar mapping. So if you use planar mapping, you can have a flat map and project it straight onto the surface. So that's what I would suggest using in this specific case, but depending on what you're doing, you might want to use cylindrical mapping or something like this, where it's a surface, so it doesn't have to be a flat surface. You can have a very complex surface. And then there's other tools like this one here, which is really useful. And I guess I should show you how that works because this one is really, it's a tool you use a lot. It comes really handy once you understand how it works. So the first thing I want to cover is how do you set this toolbar into your workspace. So you already know where to find it. You go under Render Tools, you expand this toolbar, and if you just drag this gray area at the top, you can drag it anywhere you want. So typically I use the standard toolbar. So I will just grab this toolbar here, and there's two ways to grab a toolbar. There's clicking on the names, which would do something like this. So that's not really what I want. So I will drag it out. And there's this second option where instead of clicking on the title, you can click on this blue part on the right side of the title. And if you drag it into your sidebar, it will appear here. Now, sometimes this doesn't work because you can lock your toolbars. So in this case, I have it as unlocked, but you can lock the docked windows. So if that's the case for you, you might want to dock it and nothing is going to happen. You can't really dock this type of panel when it is locked. So you may have to click here on the options and unlock the docked windows so that you can have this panel here. Now, if you close the file, this panel should still be here. You don't have to save your toolbars or anything like that. It should always be here. So let's look at projecting UV mapping. How do we do that? It seems like this is not the front view, so let me reset the views. You can reset the views by clicking here. Okay. So you can click on the object you want to apply the UV mapping to. So this would be the revolved surface. And then we can use apply planar mapping. So just click on this button and it's going to ask you to draw a box. And there's a few things you can do. You can use 3 points or you can use a standard box. So I will use a standard box and just hold Shift. So if I hold Shift, it remains a square, a 1-to-1 ratio. Now if you let go of it, you can have a ratio that is not square. Typically, it is best to use a square, so I will just use that ratio. Now you can be a lot more precise. You can use a box, and you could map it so that it's a specific size. Like for example, I can hold Shift, create a regular box, and I did that just by clicking here, a rectangle, hold Shift, and I can center the box. So if I press M, enter to move the box, find the center point, press 0 and enter, so I just centered the box to my object. They share the same center point. And now if I create a planar map again, I can make sure that it's perfectly square and perfectly centered to this geometry. And then it will ask you, do you want UV or UVW? So in this case, we want UV. UV is two-dimensional. UVW, I'm guessing it's like X, Y, and Z. In this case, it's two-dimensional, so we don't really need it to recognize the depth of a map. So I will press Enter. And mapping by default, it's 1. But you can stack different maps because they could have transparency. If you use a PNG, you can have multiple PNGs on top of each other. So in this case, we will use 1. There will be no transparency here. And you can see now the map is projecting in a way that is flat. Now, if you look at the material, you will see that here it is, the material. You will see that the map is a clogged JPEG, and it's this image. So this is definitely not the image we would want to use. So let's find a different image that might work a little better. Let's go up here, and I will find a map that illustrates the point. So we can use something like this, black and white, or we can use something a little more fancy. I will just use this one. Open. So it's just a bunch of black and white squares, but you can see how this is a big improvement, right? It's not getting sucked into the middle of a shape. Now, depending on what you're doing, this may not be the right way to map something onto the object. So let's look at this view. And in this case, it seems to work really well. But you can see how it's getting distorted here because it's being projected in a way that is straight. So if you wanted to modify that, you may need to use something different, maybe spherical or maybe cylindrical. So in this case, let's say we want something spherical. So we'll click on it, use spherical, and I will press on the center. I'll just press 0 instead. This should be the same center. And then if I look at the shape, it seems like, yeah, it seems like the seam. So when you do a shape like this, there's always a seam, and it looks like the seam would be that way. Yeah. So if I go from a top view, I should get better results. Yeah, so let's look at what that looks like. In this case, it says 2. We want it to be on the same mapping number 1. So we'll press Enter, and this is what you get. So here you can see using a sphere, And this is what I was talking about with the seam. It's still going to come to a single point up here. So spherical would probably not be the best method. Yeah, so in this case, I think you will get better result if you use planar. But yeah, but maybe with sphere, depending on how you map it, you might get good results as well. So let's look at that. If we wanted to modify that so it looks a little more flat, we could use this setting here. It's called Edit Object Texture Mapping Coordinates. So what this does here is it lets you modify the positioning of a map in a way that is a lot more precise. And so here you can see the result. And so this illustrates the way that the map is being projected onto the polygon, the mesh of your surface. So depending on how you use it, you can do some really complex things or some pretty basic stuff. So here, for example, if I want to make sure it matches, I can enable all of the points and I can make sure that this is centered. So now I know that it's going to be perfectly centered, and maybe I want to change the proportions and scale it in one dimension. Let's see what this does. Still not very good. Okay. Yeah, I don't think it's gonna get much better. So yeah, this is probably not going to work. But you see the point. So it's basically using a sphere to project a sphere as an image onto your object. So again, this is not the best way. So I would reverse back to the previous method using a simple planar project. And sometimes it's really worthwhile to do this, to try different methods. In this case, we know that the image is flat, the object is flat, so it makes a lot more sense to use something completely flat. Now, depending on what you're doing, maybe the cylindrical might work because it's also flat. So let's try that really quick. Enter. And if we say it's flat up to this point, and then we say that the sides will be projected in a way that is basically a cylinder. So the sides we can expect to have some strangeness happening, but on the front side it should be perfectly flat. So cap, we want it to be capped, yes. Enter, and the mapping again, we want it to be 1. We want to replace the previous one, and this is what we get. So here you go, you get some much better results. So now you can see it projects perfectly flat, and at some point on the sides it starts projecting a little sideways. So I think this works for what we're doing here. I think it works really well. But again, if you wanted to really dial everything in, maybe you do want to go back and use this other tool here, Edit Object Texture Mapping Coordinates. And using this tool, if I hold Shift, it's weird that it's not perfectly square. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. And this is what it does. Okay. Yeah, so maybe planar mapping might be better because you can see how the sides do have some very strange distortion here. So this again may not be the best method for projecting that map. Hmm. Yeah, it is a little strange that it's doing that on the side. So yeah, sometimes it works really well. For example, if this was the leg of an object and you're trying to project a wooden texture onto the side, that would work really well because the bottom would be that map and the side would start having the same map but wrapping around in a way that is cylindrical. But in this case, it's not. It's a little inconsistent. And looking at the image, I don't see anything strange here, but looking at the way it projects there, you can see that it's a bit irrational the way it's twisting. I wouldn't expect it to twist in this way. So let's cancel that, and we can just use a planar mapping, which is the first option I used. Just using a straight-on square, two-dimensional, and we will use planar mapping 1, enter. So we're just basically taking the image and projecting it perfectly straight. And then, as you know, you could still click on this and you could scale the texture. So let's do that just for fun. If we click here, select the object, this one, enter. So now if you look at the perspective view and the front view, if we look at them side by side, you can see how using this tool, you could scale the image in 1 dimension or 2 dimensions, and you can really dial in the size of the image and the way that it repeats. So you can see in perspective, the image has gotten a lot, the relationship between the image has changed, right? The image is smaller in relationship to the object. So you get more of the image, or the image repeats more. Now if I scale it the opposite way, let's say we want to make the image bigger. So then I would scale it in 2 dimensions. And if I scale the image or the object, the polygons down, then you will see the texture gets a lot larger. So it's a relationship between the polygons and the way that the image is projected onto the polygons. So let's say this is the result we're looking for, something like this. Then I would apply, and that's it. So hopefully this gives you a better idea on how you would do this, how you would be able to use these different tools and be able to project some kind of image or graphic onto some of these surfaces.